I'm Mary Sullivan, for those of you who don't know me. Yeah. So I had my knee replaced 1 week and 4 days ago. And I'm hoping I can pull this talk off. And I don't have a title yet. Can you hear me okay? All right. I'm a little befuddled between the pain meds and the other stuff. But things are surprisingly good, everything considered. Well, I guess I don't have a choice but to start. So I like to listen to NPR on Sundays or Saturdays. And a couple of weeks ago, there's a show on NPR called Snap Judgment. And the host of the show, I think his first name is Flynn. Flynn Williams. He's really an excellent host. He's a Black man. He lives in Washington, I think. And he has the storytellers. These are the people experiencing the story, tell the most interesting stories. So this is first person. This is not third person. So I was really intrigued by this story. He introduces us to a young teenage Black Muslim man living in, I think, Chicago, but I'm not sure. I thought it was a Canadian province. David thought it was Chicago. Anyway, his family is devout Muslim. His mother, as he recalls it, is a real busybody, having to know what her children are doing and where they are when they are not in school. He recalls her as being on the telephone constantly with her network of informers, her friends, likely other moms, other Muslim moms, keeping their eyes peeled for the comings and goings of their offspring. So they appear to be both loved very much, but as having intrusive, prying moms. Some of this, Muhammad implies, is in the service of keeping them true to their one true religion. So Muhammad, I think that's his name, attends public school in a very white, likely very Christian neighborhood. I can't remember what sect of Islam he belongs to, but it is not all that germane to the story. In any case, he appears schooled in the ways of that sect, but is starting to question in his own mind, raise questions in his own mind about what it means to be human and Muslim. Also, he is starting to fall in love. Unfortunately, the person is his age, but is non-Muslim. She is white, Christian, and about 16 years old. Except for her age, she stands for everything his family disapproves of on religious and possibly racial grounds. In any case, they start courting. Mostly, as I recall it, they meet after school in not so clandestine places. In other words, they're out in the open. The relationship is out in the open. I did not get all of the details, but he starts to investigate how he can carry on this relationship in the context of his faith and upbringing. His readings and discussions with friends and investigations into alternatives lead him to a startling conclusion. And I don't recall his sources. The literature, if he used literary sources, or even Muslim teachings of any stripe, I just don't remember. And it all seemed very vague and mysterious. And perhaps it was. Maybe he used Sufi teachings. such as the one above the screen door, the front porch entrance to Dharma Field. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I will meet you there. It's right there. That's a Rumi quote. It's a lovely quote. But Rumi was never mentioned explicitly. Anyway, he and his beloved come to the decision to marry on very circumscribed terms. They enter into a one-year marriage contract, dissoluble after a year by mutual agreement. Where he came up with this, I don't know. They go to her house for assignations, and you never get the impression the marriage is consummated. They never go all the way, maybe 3/4 of the way. I don't know. They don't get real explicit. Anyway, this goes on for a while. He doesn't miss school, but as I recall it, he meets his wife after school every day, takes her. Oh, then they come to the decision, unwise, to take her to his family and introduce her. As I recall it, the family is not notified in advance. I can't remember if they show up together before or after dinner, possibly before. In any case, the family is at first thunderstruck and speechless. He introduces her as his wife. Then his mother's silent but white-hot rage starts to become apparent. Muhammad decides to hustle his new bride out of there and walk her home. You're liking this. Anyway, he returns, and the family has evidently come to a conclusion and a decision. They've concluded that he has taken leave of his senses because he is possessed by a jinn. That's Jinn. That's a Muslim devil, an evil spirit. And he is essentially imprisoned in the family home and then treated as an extradited prisoner and flown in shackles, maybe, I don't remember the details, in a rickety, or so it seemed to him, twin-engine plane to Somaliland, the northern half of Somalia, where his family is from. They arrive in Somaliland in a very arid and desert-like environment. But yeah, okay. Okay, but so what has happened? So they've decided he's been possessed, and so they're taking him to an exorcist. So this exorcist, I don't know what happened to them. The exorcist hut is on a ridge or a mountain from which you can see all around. He has a panoramic view of all that surrounds his hut. He is dragged off the plane by family members who have accompanied him and taken to the door of the hut. They knock. The exorcist comes to the door. He is tall, bearded, a bit gaunt, wears robes. He moves, according to Muhammad, which I think is a very interesting observation, as though he means every movement. I got the impression of someone who is both self-possessed, pardon the pun, and mindful of how he moved about the earth. That impressed me. So Muhammad didn't say this, but it sounded like the exorcist understood the mindfulness of body and posture. When the exorcist, so Muhammad is made is marched into the parlor or whatever and made to kneel in front of the exorcist. By the way, this exorcist is the most famous exorcist in all of Somalia. Anyway, so when he is knelt down in front of the exorcist, the exorcist places his hands on his head and forehead. Muhammad is tempted to act out like a rebellious teenage boy. He is tempted to scream at the exorcist, yell, pitch a fit, remove the exorcist's hands from his forehead, be obnoxious, punish the exorcist for his plight. However, he doesn't. He waits to see what will happen. He sits quietly. After a bit, the exorcist removes his hands from Muhammad's forehead and announces to the family and to Muhammad, there is nothing wrong with this boy. This child is perfect. I was stunned, let alone like how Muhammad must have felt. The exorcist's pronouncement freed something up. I was ready to judge, demonize the exorcist, but this did not happen. So to return to Muhammad, he's flown back home and essentially released from the imprisonment. He and his bride mutually agree to terminate their marriage after the year is up. I think, though I'm not sure because I sort of stopped listening after the exorcist made his revelation, that Muhammad did remarry, possibly more appropriately. I don't remember. Anyway, he became, I think, a writer and an artist. But again, I'm not sure. Anyway, I got the impression he's happy. So the last talk I gave at Dharma Field, I based it on readings from Thich Nhat Hanh's The Miracle of Mindfulness. I'm going to return to that. Thich Nhat Hanh reminds us that our true nature is emptiness, complete, thoroughgoing interdependence. I would venture to say that this is what the exorcist experienced. That is Muhammad's true nature, one of emptiness, thoroughgoing, flux, flow, change, complete interdependence. He saw Muhammad's true nature, and with this understanding, liberated all beings on the spot. So, Thich Nhat Hanh says, while you sit in meditation, after having taken hold of your mind, that's just becoming aware, you can direct your concentration to contemplate on the interdependent nature of certain objects. This meditation is not a discursive reflection on a philosophy of interdependence. It is a penetration of mind into mind itself, using one's concentrative power to reveal the real nature of the object being contemplated. He says, recall a simple and ancient truth. The subject of knowledge cannot exist independently of the object of knowledge. To see is to see something. To hear is to hear something. To be angry is to be angry over something. Hope is hope for something. Thinking is thinking about something. When the object of knowledge, the something, is not present, there can be no subject of knowledge. The practitioner meditates on mind, and by so doing, is able to see the interdependence of the subject of knowledge and the object of knowledge. This is a complete interdependence. As Trusting the Heart Mind says, when mind vanishes, things follow it. Object is object for the subject. Subject is subject for the object. The thoroughgoing relativity of these two is originally one emptiness. So Thich Nhat Hanh goes on to say, when we practice mindfulness of breath, then the knowledge of breath is mind. When we practice mindfulness of the body, then the knowledge of body is mind. When we practice mindfulness of objects outside ourselves, then the knowledge of these objects is also mind. Therefore, the contemplation of the nature of interdependence of all objects is also the contemplation of the mind. Then he talks about a meditation practice that I thought to myself, well, we really don't do this meditation practice here at Dharma Field. But then I remembered that, in fact, we do. We did. Long time ago, when Steve was teaching, a long time, he taught a course on the 5 aggregates, some of which drove us crazy. So the 5 aggregates are form, sensation, conception, or conceptual knowledge in Steve's syntax, Steve's setup, inclination of mind, and then perception or awareness. So form, sensation, conception, inclination, and then perception. So, and some of you are going to remember, some of you are going to remember this. Those of you who are in the class, Steve would talk about how in meditating on form, consider, he'd hold up a picture of himself as a baby and of himself as an adult. And he'd say, pointing to the adult, so this is my baby picture. And then to the adult. And then he'd say, pointing to the baby picture, is this me? Now, at that time, the answer is, well, who else would it be? Of course, it's you, me, you, Steve. Of course, who else would it be? But as Steve comes to point out, how would that be possible? There's no physical resemblance. The change is so thoroughgoing that the difference between the picture of the child and the difference between the picture of the adult is, immeasurable. This itself in itself is emptiness. And then he talks about, the pancreas, another example of a solid organ, a substance. And he talked about how within the span of a few days, with the dying of cells in the pancreas and regeneration of those cells, within, 72 hours, we have a whole new pancreas, completely unbeknownst to us. And so he's pointing to the emptiness of form in that meditation. With regard to sensation, the second skanda, he talked about scent. So a friend of us gave us a scented candle in a can, like an aluminum can. So when it was brand fresh and the can was covered and it was almost halfway across the room, and I'd be lying on the couch, I could smell that scent, that herbal scent. And Steve would use scent as an example of sensation, because he would say, where exactly is the sensation occurring? Is it happening in the nose? But the can is across the room. Is it from the candle itself? But somehow it's right here. It's not anywhere else. Is it in the brain? Well, there's all kinds of theories about smelling in the brain, but we don't have to go there. It's not directly experienced as in the brain anyway. So she was saying, where exactly is this experienced? And he was pointing out, you can't really pin that down. So that's a meditation on sensation. And then conception. Well, now that we've all been meditating for a while, Steve Hagen's written an entire book on the evanescence of thought, on its illusory nature. You may be holding on to some sort of thought in meditation, and then all of a sudden it's replaced by another thought, possibly another thought. And so we're taught just to return to the breath, return to this, return to now. And so it's as I said, in meditation now or never, Steve's written an entire book on meditation, on conceptual knowledge, including that of faltering, becoming discouraged, all the range of human experience that can show up in meditation and how to handle that, but also how evanescent all of that is, how non-graspable all of that is. And then for meditation on the fourth one, intention. Intention was the Buddha's second greatest insight, motivation. Again, one day we might think, wow, I would love to have X. And then say we can't afford X. A week goes by, and we look at X again, we think, whatever made me want that? So it's kind of the leaning of mind toward wanting, desire, or away from not wanting, and the evanescence of that, how quickly that can change, how we are not, as we imagine, subject to these desires that show up if we're just patient and just let them be and not play with them. And then the fifth skandha is perception in Steve's taxonomy. And that's just awareness, not just awareness. That's totality, that's wholeness. That's what the Buddha saw when he woke up and he said, I, the great earth, and all beings simultaneously attain the way. That's exactly what he saw. And Thich Nhat Hanh, Steve Matushak has talked about this kind of contemplation of interdependence in terms of a table. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about the table. The table's existence is possible due to the existence of things which we might call the non-table world, the forest where the wood grew and was cut, the carpenter, the iron ore, which became the nails and screws, and countless other things which have relation to the table. The parents and ancestors of the carpenter, the sun and rain, which made it possible for the trees to grow. And he says, if you grasp the table's reality, not grasp it, but just see it for what it is, then you see that in the table itself are present all those things which we normally think of as the non-table world. If you took away any of those non-table elements and returned them to their sources, the nails back to the iron ore, the wood to the forest, the carpenter to his parents, the table would no longer exist. This is emptiness. This is wholeness. This is our experience. Thich Nhat Hanh goes on to say, a person who looks at the table and can see the universe is a person who can see the way. He says something very interesting. You meditate on the assembly of the 5 aggregates in yourself in the same manner as the table. You meditate on them until you are able to see the presence of the reality of oneness in your own self and can see your own life and the life of the universe are one, not separate, totally interdependent. If the 5 aggregates return to their sources, as he gave in the example of the table, if they return to their sources, the self, the table, no longer exists. Each second, the world nourishes the 5 aggregates. The self is no different from the assembly of the 5 aggregates. He goes on. Steve also used to talk about with a table, we can be fooled by how solid it is, but he talked about the electromagnetic forces that govern the universe, govern our ability to exist on this planet, that are holding the table, making in place, keeping it feel solid, keeping everything together. And that if you go down, if it's possible to go down and down and down into the wood making up the table, you can see that the spaces between, I don't know, not electrons. Somebody help me out. Yeah, they get smaller. So the spaces get larger and larger and larger. And the particles themselves get smaller and smaller and smaller. And until the point where if never mind, doesn't matter. He's talked about that. He says we have to strip away all the barriers in order to live as part of the universal life. A person isn't some traveling entity. Some private entity traveling unaffected through time and space, as if sealed off from the rest of the world by a thick shell. Living for 100 or 100,000 lives, sealed off like that, not only isn't living, but it isn't possible. In our lives are present a multitude of phenomena, just as we are present in many different phenomena. We are life, and life is limitless. He says, perhaps one can say that we are only alive when we live the life of the world. And so live the sufferings and joys of others, not to be confused with weak boundaries, which I sometimes have. So you're not necessarily feeling somebody else's pain, but you're aware of, as when you sit in meditation, for example, not only are the people in the room supported by the sitting of meditation, the whole universe is supporting you in that practice, and you are supporting the entire universe in that practice. In Burkett, in his book, Enlightenment is an Accident. This is his most recent book. Points out on page 146 that Zazen, or meditation, is a dualistic practice. I found that an interesting observation. He says, it is a dualistic practice used to still and open our mind. During meditation, over and over, we bring our attention back to the object of focus. Then we go out into the world and put our meditation into action by bringing our attention to each activity, whether we're drinking a glass of water or driving on the freeway. If someone cuts us off on the road and we begin to get angry, We can bring awareness to our breath and anchor ourselves there so we don't get tossed around by our anger. And he suggests and then he has a great quote by Suzuki Roshi. We do a dualistic practice with a non-dual mind. He goes on about dualistic practices. When we infuse our dualistic practices with a non-dual attitude, not trying to get something, not leaning one way or the other. He says, the boundary between you and me softens. Instead of focusing on becoming more important or clinging to some ideal about becoming kinder and better, which is very human, we notice how programmed we are to improve ourselves. And then we can return to our inherent wholeness. Again, as the Shin Ching Ming says, the way has nothing lacking, nothing extra. And it means it. There's nothing lacking and there's nothing extra. This is not going to be a real long time. Dogen, I want to point out that over and over again, Dogen admonishes us in the Fukan Zazengi, have no designs on becoming a Buddha. He addresses the issue of not using meditation for anything. He says, if you want to attain suchness, you should just practice suchness without delay. Cuts through a lot of crap there. Anyway, in other words, just do it. Just sit down. Just meditate. On page 121 of Tim Burkett, he says, this is a Dogen quote, a greatly enlightened person is nevertheless deluded. To understand that is the quintessence of practice. That's what the Shin Ching Ming says when it says, there's nothing lacking, nothing extra. Can't exclude delusion, can't have enlightenment without delusion, can't have delusion without enlightenment. They're totally thoroughgoing, interdependent. God, I had another great quote. I just don't know if I can find it. Oh, maybe that's it. I like this quote. So Dogen's thing, as we know from the Fukan Zazengi, Dogen says, the Zazen he says, the Zazen I speak of is not learning meditation. That's not it either. Once you have adjusted your posture, take a deep breath, inhale and exhale, rock your body right and left, and settle into a steady, immobile thinking and steady, immobile sitting position. Think of not thinking. How do you think of not thinking? Non-thinking. This in itself is the essential art of Zazen. So you could say that's bringing a non-dual attitude to a dualistic practice. Or you could say that's just practicing. It's duality is not an issue there. Maybe it's a matter of interpretation. I'm not sure. So how do we think, not thinking, non-thinking? This is an expression of wholeness, totality, reality. Basically, we just want to keep doing Zazen. I wish I could find that quote. It was about the water, about how the water doesn't say to, it's the contents of the water. I don't know, I wish I could find it. It doesn't say purify yourself. Yeah, I just can't. It was such a great quote. It basically was saying, don't judge. The water doesn't judge. Don't judge. Be kind to yourself. Well, anyway, I can't find it. And I'm done. Any questions or comments? Norma.
Yeah, I just have a comment. I just found it fascinating that the different sources, how they all boil down to the same message. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you.